Hey there, STEM enthusiasts! Welcome back to Kameron's Lab, Dive In, the go-to podcast for STEM students, crafted with passion by one of your own. I'm Kameron, your enthusiastic and ever-curious host. Buckle up for today's insightful episode. Ready to dive in? Good afternoon, Dr. Jack. So really excited, everyone, to have Dr. Jack Kreindler with me. He is a UCL graduate for his medical degree. And also, I believe he did a postgraduate at UCL as well.
I did what was in the days called an intercalated BSc. So I did a physiology degree there as well. Yeah.
Very, very cool. And from there, he's also done a lot of different companies. If you look at his LinkedIn, you'll see about 17 different experiences.
Hope not that many, but
it's just a lot of different things that he's been going through. So I just wanted to talk to him today a little bit more about going from the background of medicine and then later into entrepreneurship and the idea of what's going on now in terms of medicine and technology.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So I guess let's hop right in. So I just want to talk to you about what made you go from medicine and then into entrepreneurship? What kind of sparked that change?
Well, maybe it might be worth saying what made me go into medicine from entrepreneurship, I suppose. So I from a very young age, 13, was tinkering around on computers. I was super interested in human-computer interfaces, graphical user interfaces, like how humans talk to computers and vice versa. Then I went into medicine because I think there was some parental pressure probably on not just being a designer or something like that. But, maybe that would have been an amazing career as well. Who knows? But yeah.
At this time, it's definitely turning into a good career.
Could have ended up at Pixar or ended up working at Apple or who knows. But back then it was, do you want to design icons for a living? No. So I went to study medicine, and then really my entrepreneurship journey carried on. And after qualifying in medical school, started my first startup as well as being a doctor. So it's always been a combined career of medicine and tech ever since.
Wow, very exciting. I like this idea of you not starting in medicine, but then going into it and then switching back into something else. But it seems like your companies are all still very health related. Is there a reason for the interest in health?
Yeah, that is true. Most of my stuff is health related. I guess it's because I fused together medicine and technology, and that's really, I can't really get away from that. I guess a lot of people do generalize. I decided that medicine and some of the grand challenges to solve there were big enough things to try and solve rather than the entirety of the woes of the world. So yeah,
good idea.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't need to be a superhero. You can be a superhero in a specialized way.
Yeah.
Very exciting. I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about the Center for Health Performance, Human Health Performance that you founded. If you could tell us a bit about how it got started, what made you interested, and then where it is now in terms of WellFounded, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Sure. So CHHP, I started that and then was very rapidly joined by a bunch of really esteemed colleagues in medicine, human performance science, and I guess they call it longevity research now, but really then it was physiology and health optimization. And the idea was to form a center. That's why we called it a center. Where health optimization and human performance science all glued together to make medicine better, to get better medical outcomes for people. And that's why we called it the Center for Health and Human Performance. It does what it says on the tin. It's been around for 16 years. And from that, we have, as you mentioned, created a specific health service for people like me, founders, and we've called that WellFounded. So it's all about physical, mental, and performance-related services for founders who are trying to, essentially untrained individuals who've never had any training in how to run companies or how to perform in an extreme environment and help them not break.
Really, that's really important, especially now, all the different pressures and so many things you want to specialize in, but you have to kind of keep it all together. Yeah. So I think that's really good as well. I wanted to go back to how you mentioned about, keeping it together under extreme conditions. When I first met you, it was at one of the conferences, and you gave a wonderful presentation where you mentioned an expedition that you did where you were looking at when you went to, I believe it was Antarctica?
Antarctica.
And you had gone to was a big group of people, everyone. And you went to go and do that experiment under extreme conditions. Is that also linked to your WellFounded? research as well?
Everything that we've done in extreme environments is hopefully helpful to other extreme environments that are not physical extreme environments like Antarctica. So they include intensive care, they include being at home but being very sick. You're in a physiologically stressed state. And also, absolutely, startups are an extreme environment. So what is it that we can learn by getting healthy volunteers and really putting them at the edge, if not even beyond the edge of their capabilities, certainly beyond their comfort zone? Study who does well, who doesn't, what might be the factors involved, and then apply that to helping medicine improve, helping people get out of intensive care quicker, using devices, for instance, to detect when people are not going to do as well as they ought to. And also, how do we optimize people for the stresses, physical and mental, in occupational settings like their startups?
Definitely back to the startups again. I really like that idea of just making sure that people are optimal in their everyday lives. Have you noticed anything, I guess, in your research or even in your own everyday life? Because I know you've done quite a few startups as well. Is there anything that you've seen as a pattern that might be like, oh, maybe you should call it back, like really reel yourself back in when you start doing these things?
Get a vaccine for entrepreneuritis or whatever you want to call it, CEO syndrome. I don't know. Look, I think that there is a balance to be struck between how much you do and how much you take of yourself and also of your relationships with others outside of work. The more you push, look, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I think that's a well-known phrase. There is always going to be a trade-off. And so I think when being asked that question, what would you do to kind of, would you remove, or what would you try to detect to try and remove the stress? It's knowing your capacity is one of the things, understanding your goals, understanding the gaps, and then filling the gaps with the resources or the time that you need, which often includes financial resources as well. And that's all the kind of planning that you would always do in an expedition, or if you're, in the military, or if you're an elite athlete, you have a goal. You know what you need to do, you know the gaps, and you fill it with the right people, the right training, and the right amount of time. And that's not something that we do really well, to be honest, in startups. We're not trained to cope in the extreme environment of startup. Most people just say, cool, I'm an entrepreneur, let's just go for it. And frankly, if it wasn't for that fundamental core attitude, we wouldn't do the things that we're going to do, because the likelihood of succeeding is slim in any case. So it's an irrational choice to be an entrepreneur a lot of the time. But there's no reason why you can't do the same thing as we do for soldiers, as we do for Formula One drivers, we do for elite mountaineers. Why don't we do that for ourselves as startup founders too?
That's a good point. I also want to link it to being a student. I feel like when you're trying to be a student and you're trying to get as many experiences as possible, talking to professors, trying to get on research projects, I feel like that's very also a little bit similar to being an entrepreneur. Like, you're trying to improve yourself as much as possible. You also need to remember just your capacity and then slowing down. I like that kind of
it's hustle.
Yeah,
I think
hustle,
it's grit. It's coming up with interesting ideas when everything else is telling you there's nothing you can do about this. Solving problems, making connections, those are all things that students are doing all the time as well. I don't think there's as much pressure to pay back investors when you're a student. And there is also, generally speaking, more support in a sense, because you know that if you do dig deep enough, you know that you're going to find the right people. But sometimes that's not the case when you're an entrepreneur.
Have you found for yourself as an entrepreneur, when you have that, I guess, lack of support, how do you keep yourself going? Other than, of course, the grit that you would have to have as an entrepreneur, but how do you keep yourself going when you feel like maybe there's not as much support in that area? How do you keep going through that?
Changes from time to time, but invariably part of it is, again, knowing when to take a break, even if that's for a part of a day. as opposed to a part of a week or weeks of a month, which is actually a very, very difficult thing to do when you're, you have those pressures of startup. I think it's cadence. It's like really doing big bursts and then having that kind of wave of doing stuff and then doing less. That happens, those circadian or ultradian rhythms happen in our biology as well. So, remember, I know it sounds really simple, but remembering to eat, remembering to sleep, there is more than enough evidence that we should fight against that urge to just do and impress and kind of have this view that leadership is about appearing like, you're doing your best by breaking yourself. The cadence, the intensity, the recovery, and the recovery can be in terms of time. It can be in terms of nature. You can take calls whilst you're walking through some trees, for instance. Exercise is incredibly important as well. All the stuff that we all know, you just got to keep reminding yourself of it.
Keep going.
Okay. Do you still remember to brush your teeth as an entrepreneur? Probably. Why don't you remember to eat properly, to have a portion of your day which is not for your work, but for yourself or with others you love? Why do you not have a portion of your time to looking after your body's recovery in terms of sleep? We still brush our teeth. We should do all these other things.
Definitely.
I know it's hard. I mean, look, there's no question of it. When you're studying for exams, you know that you're going to have so many weeks of just cramming and so forth. But you also know that there's an end to it.
It's true.
Make sure you build those ends into your career as an entrepreneur as well.
That's good advice, actually. I feel like we don't get told that enough. Most of the time it's more like, just keep going, but not.
Or you're telling yourself, which is even worse.
Yeah, it's like from everywhere.
Yeah.
If I could go back a little bit more to the medicine side. So you mentioned a lot about just regulating yourself, reminding yourself. Is that something that you would also do? Oh, actually, no. That is something that you do as well in the WellFounded program. So when your founders come to you, they just want to be taken care of, making sure that they're on top of things. If you could talk a little bit more about, I guess, the medical side of that.
The medical side of the WellFounded program is kind of what you would do if you were looking after somebody who you thought was well, and you wanted to find out, are there any kind of things that you can tweak? So we do a big medical deep dive. It's a long consultation. I mean, it's not your 6 minutes with a GP. It's probably an hour and a half, 2 hours, where you look at everything from, before you were conceived to today. And then, looking at bloods, but not just the standard things that we might want to maybe screen for to just check that nothing ghastly is going on, but also look at micronutritional factors that might affect performance, hormonal things. Those are all the sorts of things that you would do if you were an elite athlete, let's say, in one of the gold medal candidate squads for an Olympic Games. You would have a performance physician and a performance team together with a nutritionist, a physiologist, the psychologist, the musculoskeletal experts, etc. And you would glue together those bits together with the medicine in order to find out, okay, here are the deficits, here are the gaps. It comes back to gaps again, kind of you don't know where the gaps are unless you really think about it or unless you test, and then filling those gaps with either things you need to change in your diet, seeing more sun, taking the vitamin D orally, whatever it might be. And obviously, if you pick up something, what better a way than to deal with it after you've picked it up, than have a team of people around you to help you fix those things. What's really surprising, though, is how much long-term health disease risk we are seeing in even young founders. And I think a lot of that is because if they're not on a plane, because that's there's a lot of travel sometimes, we're sitting on our butts too much. And we're on screens too much. And it's kind of, again, you can't just say don't do it, but why not somehow fill in the gaps? If you are going to be sitting around a lot, why not get the right kind of chair? Why not make sure that you're doing, 10 dips or something in the corner of your kitchen whilst you're waiting for the tea to brew? It's like using smart ways of filling in the gaps if you can't afford the time to go to the gym and these kinds of things. So, Yeah, it's very, very interesting how many potentially sick people there are who are trying to do very, very important things in the fields of AI, robotics, climate, health, whatever area, especially health. You think, okay, you're a health innovator,
Shouldn't
but
that be
you're
applied to yourself?
Yeah, but you're broken, or you're breaking, or you will break. And so I think that was kind of the most surprising thing so far, is that in the younger people, truly how severe the risks are. Undetectable mostly, but now, like with things, wearables, which were unheard of 10 years ago, we can really cheaply see some of those early signs and do something about it.
That's really interesting. I also wanted to link it back to, I know you're a love of Star Wars, and you mentioned that Darth Vader.
How do you know? Well, the world knows. I know.
I'm pretty sure. But for that kind of like innovative and really futuristic approach to medicine, but also the idea of like wearables as well, is really bringing that future a little bit closer than it was before. Is there any technology that you see now that brings us a little bit closer to, I guess, that Darth Vader kind of help?
Well, I think you're probably referring to the well publicized screen that I present at conferences, which is Darth Vader with various arrows saying, multi-organ failure, psychological issues, and asthma, COPD, and all the rest of it. Yeah,
definitely referring to that.
And the concept there is to try and find a way of communicating that there are lots of bits of technology that would, in the case of someone like Darth Vader with all the resources he's got on the Death Star, be applied to try and help even somebody that's got loads of stuff wrong with them to live life to the full, run the galaxy, and so on and so forth. So your question really is thinking about what are the kinds of technologies that we can apply to ourselves, either healthy or not so lucky to be healthy people. And I think overall, what we're seeing is the miniaturization of more and more things that previously required big batteries, wires, would not be possible outside of a lab. And they're not only becoming wearable, but also becoming cool. So things become a talking point, and they could be apps. For instance, the Humanity app is pretty fun for some people. I think it's really remarkable what those guys are doing in terms of gamifying behavioral change towards healthier longevity. Aura is a great example. Whoop is a great example. First Beat is a bit more complicated, but really decent research grade kind of stuff. The kind of things that we took to the South Pole, even that work even in really extreme environments where you can't really feel your fingers and things like that, are all available now for not very much money. Pretty well for everybody, and you can learn an awful lot from those things. They may not be at any single point in time the most accurate thing that you would compare to a laboratory test. But if you're doing it, you can't be in a laboratory for 6 months, but you can have one of these devices on you all the time for 6 months. Huge amounts of insight that you can get with the right people or the right AIs. That's another piece of technology, right? that can look over that stuff and interpret things for you.
It's really interesting. I love that, actually. So you're right, 100%. I like the idea of the wearable technology and how much more interactive technology is becoming, and this idea of, I guess, gamifying it or allowing us to be more interact more with our data. I feel like most of the time you just go to the doctor, it's like, I'm sick, and he's like, cool, writes that down, and you won't see him again for another year.
Yeah. But it's the capacity. It's you've got to work with what you've got.
That technology. So if we could go back to, I suppose, like the more AI and robotics kind of standpoint, where do you see us, I guess, going, where we have like a little AI just around us all the time, like, hey, your blood pressure's kind of low, maybe you should do something about that. Like, where do you see us going?
Have we not already? Amazon has been suspected of being able to tell if you might be pregnant or have, be more likely to maybe have cancer even, just from your browsing. That's AI, but it's very, very subtle, just from what you're looking at, your age, what it knows about you. So don't underestimate the AIs that are already predicting things. But I think what you're referring to is a little bit more specifically around using a a digital or
like assistant.
AI assistant that's sort of like able to glue together some of this stuff and say, hey, a little bit like a, an old school mum, wise parent who's able to say, or grandparent, I sense that you need to do X, Y, and Z, and then they'll give you some bone broth of some kind and that will cure everything. But I do think that is pretty well already here. I wouldn't have said that a year ago, but who would have known that January of this year would have seen such a massive inflection in the advancement of what they call large language models, this form of generative AI that comes in the form of Bard and ChatGPT and others. ChatGPT is not the only one. Just bear that in mind. Bard from Google is, I think, really remarkable as well. And there's Lambda and there's different models out there. But these large language models, for the first time, you're able to talk to them in just plain old, you almost can't make a mistake in terms of the way in which you spell it or speak it, the question that is. And if, let's say, you permitted these things to take a bunch of data that you'd recorded about yourself, or even an API that drew from various things, it wouldn't take too great a stretch of the imagination for that to then say, I think that this is trending in the wrong way. I think, like athletes would say, or coaches would say that you should slow down, and we're not there yet from protecting people against bad medical advice. But in the health and performance domain, I think this is a great place to start because you can't hurt people quite as much, right? So robotics is interesting as well. So there's a lot of our life that is already robotic. If you're referring to classic robotics, where you're talking about a bipedal, humanoid, we're a little bit far away from those things being practical or cheap. But in terms of devices that help us live our lives by automating more of what we do, again, we have some of those things already around in, self-driving vehicles or driver assistance. We are seeing a lot of robots, if you like, helping us fill out our emails or tax returns, helping us read through, legal documents. And so don't just think of robotics, I think, as arms and legs and so on, but as eyes and things that turn off your heating at the right time, things that help you with your tasks on your laptop. They're already here. They will become more and more part, I think, of life, just as washing machines, dishwashers, etc. became the robots, in a sense, robots of yesterday. I do also think we should not just allow machines to do everything for us. It could create a very intellectually based but very sedentary sort of species, and that's something that needs to be careful.
It's a very fine line we're walking at the moment between allowing them to do everything and also that want to do it ourselves as well. I feel like it's a very, very fine line to walk.
We're going to make mistakes. We're going to learn. We'll end up somewhere in the middle. Some people will benefit hugely. Some people, unfortunately, will or might get hurt. And again, we'll find the middle path. We talked about waves before, like we're doing things and not doing so much, sleep, work, etc. But also the same thing happens with exploration and with pushing boundaries. You push boundaries more than you retreat. And then, you find, seems like everything in nature, physics, biology, society goes in waves, right? So I think at the moment we're going to be in a phase of pushing things probably a bit far, learning, pulling back with regulation, and it'll be cycles like that.
I want to go back to, I know you've mentioned that a lot has changed in the health department since you were first studying it in the beginning. What are some of the, I don't want to be so broad and say what are the big changes, but what is the
everything?
But what would you say is different, in terms of more like the diagnosis kind of thing? So I know you have WellFounded to keep track of your different founders and see how they're doing. But if you were to think about as a doctor when you go in,
sure,
how would that look?
Yeah, WellFounded for fast-moving people, founders, CEOs, VCs, anyone really. But it uses data from devices that we collect. So Oura Ring, we talked about those things. And also laboratory diagnostics as well, like cardiopulmonary exercise testing, CPET testing or CPEX testing. People call that VO2 max. That's one tiny bit of it, but VO2 max is one part of the kind of stuff that we measure about people's cardiorespiratory metabolic function performance. That's a really fantastic diagnostic that's now, but I mean, people talk about VO2 max all the time now. When we first started doing them in healthy people, it was not like, it was a rare thing to do a CPET test on anyone except some elite athlete somewhere. And now, I mean, there are even devices that are sort of estimating these things without even breathing in and out. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, where we've come there. But, going back to your question about more deep medical stuff.
I guess I wanted to know, how close are we to getting this kind of data for everyday people? So like, you wouldn't have to necessarily go into the GP. They could be
right. Well, I mean, okay, let's split it up into 2 points here. Okay. You've got healthy people and ultra early detection of things to help people. I mean, COVID did us some big favors because it suddenly said, oh, you can test at home. Okay. Which people didn't really think about before. I know it wasn't blood, but it was more, but now people are doing a lot of pinprick testing, and they're doing a lot of saliva testing, some hair testing, urine testing. And it's not weird to not have a doctor do that for you. It's, I can do this, and I can actually get a readable report now far quicker than going to my GP or getting a private doctor to do that for you. So that's, and just think about all of the different tests that you can do. If you're a woman, you can use fertility, for instance. That's a great startup. Not least because it's also a well-founded client, but but we obviously get to know founders very well, and that's, what fertility are doing are brilliant. But there are lots and lots of others which are doing ultra early detection of, cancer, there's endometriosis, there's cardiovascular disease, the fact that we now can quite routinely and not so expensively measure the apolipoprotein B, ApoB, which is the one really key thing that you want to measure amongst all of the cholesterol, high density, low density, triglycerides, blah, blah, blah. ApoB, like, what was that ages ago? Now everyone's able to do it from a pinprick. It's really interesting. So, key factor in cardiovascular disease, more people are measuring things like with a breath test. They can pick up volatile organic compounds that could be indicators for things like cancer, for instance. I mean, I could literally carry on for the whole of this interview and a week on all of the great things that we could do as far as diagnostics are concerned. But 25 years ago when I qualified, I was 23. There was not an MRI scanner except I think there was one at UCH, but it wasn't like everywhere in every hospital. Now you can go, and for 1,500 quid, 1,600, you can go and get two professors of radiology, who are world experts in diffusion weighted MRI, which does ultra early cancer detection. I mean, imagine technology today where you can walk in, get an MRI, get two people remotely to look at your scans and give you either the all clear, or you should track something, or you should immediately go and do something about it. Like, this is unheard of. The prices are coming down, from everything from scanning through to blood tests through to the little things that tell you when your sleep is not so good, and that your stress is building up and you don't even notice it. Or that you're entering a fertile moment. So maybe if you're using non-barrier contraception, it's time to change behaviors, if you don't want to get pregnant. So, I mean, you cannot imagine 25 years ago, but I think the biggest change, you asked me what's the biggest one, is the fact that everything that we've ever written, all the questions and answers, all the research, all the textbooks are in the cloud. They're in your pocket.
That's great.
And not only are they searchable, but now they're quizzable through the LLMs. And that to me is the biggest change. It's not the devices, it's AI has made some big leaps, and we're seeing them usable not just by military and by academics, but by all of us. It's really both scary and very different a quarter of a century ago.
Yeah, definitely. A bit of both. Scary. And they're exciting at the same time. I guess kind of just to finish everything out, if you wouldn't mind giving some advice to students that might want to follow a similar path. So maybe they're focused on something now and maybe they'll transition into another career and then try to make their own company. What kind of advice would you give for people that are looking to, I guess, improve themselves and keep going to be someone like yourself?
Don't be someone like me, but this is another thing that's changed in 25 years is that I don't think there were many folk like me. Maybe I was possibly the first one who was still a full-time practicing doctor and an entrepreneur. There are things, so if you're a doctor in the NHS or you're newly qualified or a student, you've got things like the clinical entrepreneur program that actually says you can take time out and return to your job or do a dual career in innovation and in medicine. So things like, the NHS clinical entrepreneurs scheme is unbelievably important. But now there are so many great communities usually from the incubators, accelerators and startups, but also government-based meetups, conferences. All you need to do is to Google innovation, startup, meetup, conference, anything from the wired events, if you're interested in tech, if you're interested in ed tech, if you're interested in climate tech, in health tech, or there are myriad get-togethers where you will meet the people that you need to meet in order to think, I don't just have to go down the academic path or the industry path or the big company path, but I can also do the innovation route as well. And of course, VCs really want to get those people early. Entrepreneur First is a classic example. Go to some of their meetups, speak to some of the people that have just done this. They've come up with an idea, and speak to your university and say, can I speak to the business department? Who is your accelerator? Do you have an internal VC? Do you have a way of supporting us as we finish our degree but come up with a great idea, and either do it through the university, through the VCs, through the communities. Join as many as you can. They're great fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great advice. Welcome. And thank you for talking with me today. Hope everybody else learned as much as I did. That was amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hi again, awesome listener. That wraps up another deep dive of Kameron's Lab Dive In. Before you dive back into your day, see what I did there? Take a second to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Want a behind-the-scenes look? Bonus content? Or just some good old STEM fun? Follow me on my socials, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Kameron's Lab. And remember, every episode is a new adventure, and we've got some thrilling dives lined up for you. Don't miss out! Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.